We're in the part of the off season where I'm really starting to itch for F1 to come back. So I was kind of thinking, what kind of content could I put out? And I realized I've never actually told you all a ranking of my favorite F1 tracks. So I figured I would do a tier list of the tracks in F1. So I have 5 categories for the F1 circuits, and they are GOAT, Banger, Good, Average, and Delete. And at the end of this video, I'm actually going to go through some tracks that I would like to replace the tracks in the delete category. First up is Canada, and I am throwing Canada into average. I might be a little bit biased here because I am Canadian, so this is my home race. It's also the only race that I've been to in person. I think there's been a lot of really iconic races around this track over the years. I think specifically 2011 with Jenson Button, and then both Daniel and Lewis had their first race wins here. But apart from the really chaotic wet race last year, I don't think the races here have been that good since the cars have gotten so big. I think it was a better track when the cars were smaller, because frequently it just becomes a DRS train. But when it is good, it's really good. So you kind of got to hold out for those once in a while bangers. Next up is Austria. And this might be a bit of a controversial take, but I have Austria in average as well. I don't really know what it is about this track that I just don't really like that much. I think it's just a little bit boring. I feel like there's just something about it that's missing. And maybe it's just like variety or something, because I feel like a lot of the corners are very similar. But saying all that, it doesn't take away from the fact that there are frequently pretty good races here. I think there's a lot of heavy overtaking zones, heavy braking zones that allow for some really good overtaking battles. I think specifically of Max and Charles back in 2022, and then obviously Max and Lando's fight in 2024 that ended in them both getting punctures. But I think for a lot of the time that I've been watching races here, it's been an issue of track limits, and so that's kind of taken away from the racing there in some respects. But I do think it's gotten better since they've kind of clamped down on the track limits issue. It's on the calendar every single year, and I don't know what it is, but every year I'm never that excited for this race to come around. Maybe that's a hot take. Let me know in the comments what you really like about this track, if you like it. It's never been one that's been high on my list. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer here. I am not 100% confident on like all of the F1 tracks. So I think this next one is Silverstone. I think I'm used to seeing it flipped upside down. So feel free to flame me in the comments if I'm wrong. But Silverstone for me is a banger. I think it's partially the atmosphere around the circuit. There's a reason why they call it British bias, and it's because it is a very popular sport in Britain, and so it just brings out the crowd and a lot of energy. And I think it has probably the best sequence of corners on the grid in Maggots and Beckett's. I will say though, the racing isn't always the best around the circuit. Usually you need a bit of a late safety car in order to spice things up a little bit. But out of the years that I've been watching, only 2023 was kind of a meh race. 2022 was a banger, last year was a banger, 2021 was a banger, so it's just frequently generating really good racing. Okay, next up is Spa. I know that because Spa looks like a hot glue gun. And I think this one might be even more controversial than my Austria pick, but I'm throwing it an average as well between Austria and Canada. I know. Do I think that Spa should always be on the F1 calendar? Yes. Am I disappointed that it is moving to a rotational basis in the near future? Yes. Do I think that it doesn't suit the new F1 cars? Yes. I find Spa to be a DRS track and a power dependent track. And for that reason, Red Bull has consistently dominated here the past few years. The majority of the overtakes around Spa are DRS overtakes. There aren't very many overtakes in the twisty bits anymore. In 2022 and 2023, you just knew Max was going to win this race going into the weekend because his car was just so powerful in the DRS zones. He would blow by people before the braking zone even hit, and it just wasn't that exciting. I do think that it's obviously one of the best in terms of watching an onboard, especially up Eau Rouge and through Raidillon. And there's been some pretty iconic moments around the track, but I wouldn't call any of the races at Spa a banger for quite a while. Last year, maybe, but it was more a banger in terms of it was surprising that George Russell won before he lost than it was an exciting wheel-to-wheel battle race. I think Spa for me also, when it rains there, it just gives me so much anxiety because of how many fatalities there have been on the track in recent years, and I wish that more could be done around the Eau Rouge corners to make sure that cars don't bounce back out into the circuit. But I do think it still deserves to be on the F1 calendar because of how iconic it is and because of the history associated with the track. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for me, so that's why I have it in average. Yeah, let me know in the comments if you agree with me or if you disagree. Okay, next up is the Hungaroring, and it is another one that's going into average, right above Canada. Hungary is the second most difficult track to overtake on, behind Monaco. That doesn't really surprise me. I think races here tend to be exciting when there is a huge incident at the start and someone unexpected gets into the lead, and then it's a matter of can that person hold on for that good result. I'm thinking specifically of Esteban Ocon winning there in 2021. That iconic moment of Lewis Hamilton being on his own at the start, Fernando Alonso holding him off so that Esteban could secure the win, and Seb getting the P2 that wasn't disqualified. What do you mean? Of course he wasn't disqualified. What I like about it is that it is a very technical track, and so I think drivers tend to make a lot of mistakes on it, which can sometimes create a lot of excitement. So I think for that reason it's a little bit higher up on my track, but yeah, I think sometimes it can also generate just an absolute stinker, so you never really know. Okay, next up is Zandvoort, and Zandvoort is also going in average. I think Zandvoort is a really unique track, and so I think that's probably one of the only reasons I have it in average and not delete. I really like the banking, but we've seen in the 3 dry races around this track that the racing isn't usually that good. Max ran away with it in 2021 and 2022, and then Lando ran away with it last year. But then 2023 in the wet delivered an absolute banger. And so I think it's very weather dependent how this track does. But I think for me, given that we now have a decent sample size with it and it hasn't delivered very often, for me, it's kind of just an average track. Next up is Monza, and for me, Monza is a banger track. She is the moment, and she always delivers some of that Monza magic. I find that the racing here isn't always the best, mainly because the DRS doesn't really work that well around it because everyone's cars are so low downforce that DRS doesn't really add much of an advantage. But that makes it so difficult to overtake that it's like exciting when people go for it, and it feels like there's a battle lap after lap after lap of people trying to overtake and then failing, and that can lend to some really tense races. I think frequently here allows for some of those shock results. Pierre Gasly in 2020 is one example, Daniel Ricciardo in 2021, which holds a special place in my heart because it was the first F1 race that I watched as a fan, and it was the only race win that I saw of Daniel's live. And then Charles Leclerc winning there twice, and the Tifosi just bringing the energy. I just love this track so much. Okay, next up is Baku. And well done, Baku. You are going in banger behind Great Britain. This might be a bit high for some people. I think Baku is kind of a 50-50 track. It's either going to deliver an absolute stinker or an incredible banger. I think the bangers here have just been so good that I have to rank it in banger. 2017, 2018, 2021, and 2024 are all incredible races. And I just love all of those races so much. I think Baku 2017 might be my favorite race. It's pretty close between it and Hockenheim 2019, just because of just how chaotic it was, so unpredictable, drivers getting knocked out on the first lap and charging all the way back up, shock podiums. Daniel won that race. Seb getting red fog and ramming into Hamilton. Hamilton's headrest coming loose. Like, that race just had so much in it. And I love it so much. 2018 was also really iconic. And then 2021 with Hamilton's brake magic and Max getting unlucky with the puncture. But yeah, I love this race so much, and every year I'm just excited for it, even though it does sometimes deliver a bit of a stinker, but I just if it hits so good. Okay, next up is Singapore, and Singapore for me is going an average as well, just above Hungaroring. I find that Singapore is kind of like Monaco in that qualifying here is often better than the race. Unless there's a little bit of a wet race, then it can get kind of exciting. But yeah, I just think that it's usually a little bit of a procession around there that can lend to some exciting races. Obviously, 2023 with Carlos Sainz being the only non-Red Bull winner in that season around this track. And I think the conditions of Singapore are what make it so exciting, because it usually leads to a lot of driver error, and then that can tend to spice things up a bit. But if there isn't any driver error, then it can also be a bit of a stinker. So it's kind of 50-50 as well, kind of like Baku, but I find that when there is a good race here, it doesn't quite hit the same as Baku's good races. So I don't know. And I just never really find myself excited for the Singapore races. Okay, next up is USA, and he is going in good. I think for me, Coda takes a lot of really good elements from a bunch of tracks. Like, it has kind of a similar section to Mackett's and Beckett's, and then the first corner is obviously pretty iconic. The fan energy there is really great, and it consistently has good races, but I don't know the last time it's had an actual banger at this track. Something to it doesn't lend to wheel racing. There's been moments of goodness at it, but I don't know, something about it is just missing, and so I can't put it in the banger category. But I think it's a race that I'm always excited for every year, and I'd like to go to it one of these years. Next up is Mexico, and sorry Checo, but it's going straight into the delete bin. I find that this track stinks. There has never really been a good race for the lead around Mexico. I think the final sector through the stadium section just completely ruins any chance of a good battle. And usually turn one is pretty chaotic, but other than that, I haven't really seen that many really good races around here. Sometimes there can be drivers who have a good charge through the field, like Daniel did in 2022, I think, and then Lando in 2023. Then you had that Max and Lando battle / moment in 2024. And then obviously Checo DNFing on lap 1 in 2023, but I don't know, just the racing here is never good. I'm never excited for it. And yeah, I just wish that they would replace it with something else. It's good that Mexico has a race because the fans there are incredible, but that's kind of the only thing that is a plus for this track for me. Next up is Brazil, And Interlagos is the GOAT of all racetracks. Honestly, I think pretty well every race here is a banger. I think the only race that I've seen here that wasn't a banger was 2023, but it just consistently delivers dramatic moments, good racing, the weather can throw a wrench in plans, the track is undulating, there's always driver drama, and I just think every year it delivers such a good race. I wish that they would make it the season finale again, because we will find out later, but Yas Marina Circuit is so anticlimactic, and I just love Brazil so much. It's such a good race, and there's so much history there with Senna and Seb's win in 2012, I think, and Lewis's win in 2008, and so there's so many moments at this track, and it's such an unbelievable racetrack, and so for me, it is the GOAT of all racetracks. Next up is Las Vegas, and it's been a small sample size so far, but for me, I'm putting it in good behind COTA. Obviously, the visuals around this track are something that make it very unique. As painful as it is for the citizens of Las Vegas, watching those F1 cars go down the strip is just so cool with all the neon lights and the high big helicopter shots, and it's just a spectacle to watch. I think the race in 2023 was so good. I think it was my favorite race of that season. 2024 wasn't quite as good, but I think the racing is still pretty decent. A lot of overtaking opportunities on this track, and I actually really, really like the last corner on this track. It's so neat watching cars go around there, and I think it's such a unique corner for F1. I don't know of that many circuits with that kind of corner. I think 130R is kind of the only other similar corner that I can think of in F1. I think my few complaints that I have with the Vegas circuit though is that it is so freaking expensive. Like, this is the track that's actually closest to me, and it's just so exorbitantly priced that I don't know if I'll ever make it to it as a fan. And I also don't like how late the sessions are. I think it's ridiculous that it's at like 10 p.m. Pacific time, which is 1 a.m. for the East Coast of America, where most people live. And so if they're trying to grow the sport in North America, I don't understand why they are not trying to cater more to that audience. I guess it could be because of sundown and all that if they want the strip glowing, but I don't know. I think there's certain things about it that kind of bug me, and we haven't seen enough races there to kind of give it a verdict one way or the other. So I have it in good for now because I've liked what I've seen so far, but this could change. Next up is Qatar, and Qatar is going in delete. I don't like the fact that we are racing in Qatar. I understand that they're doing it for money, but it doesn't seem like there is a huge fan base in the Middle East, and so the fact that we have 4 races in the Middle East is frustrating, especially when you're looking at other tracks that are being taken off the calendar. We saw in 2024 that there is really only one overtaking spot on the track, and when there is debris in that overtaking spot, no one can overtake. And I think the tire wear here is still an issue. We saw that in 2023 with them forcing tire changes, and that leading to the drivers having to push for the entire race and some of them getting heat stroke. And then 2024, there was obviously the punctures that could have been caused by the mirror, but could have also been tire wear. So I don't know. I think just the conditions around this track and the high tire wear, I just don't think it's that good of a circuit for F1. Yeah, delete this track and delete the location that it is in. Next up is Abu Dhabi, aka Yas Marina, and I'm actually putting this behind Qatar. I think I would like this track more if it wasn't the season finale. I think the changes that were made to the track in 2021 improved it a little bit, but it's still really tough to overtake here. There's rarely been a good battle for the lead. the season finale in 2021 was actually going to be really anticlimactic until that last safety car. Yeah. We won't get into that race though. But yeah, I'm just so worried that 2025 is going to come down to an epic battle between multiple drivers, and then we're gonna have to go to the Yes Marina circuit, and it's like, seriously? Like, it's so anticlimactic, and yeah, it just really bugs me that this is the season finale. So that's kind of why I've knocked it below Qatar. Okay, what the fuck is that track? Oh, that's China. I literally do not know. So China, I'm actually putting in good behind Coda. I've only seen a couple races around the China track, one being the 2018 race was it 2018 or 2016? I don't know, one of those years that Daniel won it. I think it was his best race win. Oh, but Monaco was also good. I don't know. He had really good overtakes on that race, and so it's always one that I like to go back and watch. Last year was a bit chaotic. We had the grass randomly catching on fire. And then obviously both RBs being taken out through no fault of their own. I don't know. I think this is a really unique track. I think the fan base in China has really exploded thanks to Zhou Guanyu. And so I'd like to see more races here and see if it still delivers some good races. I think it's very unique. And I think I like tracks that are unique and deliver interesting results. Next up is Japan, aka Suzuka. And this also might be a bit of a hot take, but I have it in good behind Las Vegas for now. Japan often has very unpredictable races because of the weather, and the drivers all seem to really love it. It has several really iconic corners. But I think for me, it gets knocked down because of how dangerous it can be. And I don't know, it's kind of similar to Coda in that none of the races there have been bangers since I've started watching, but they've all been pretty decent races. So that's why I have it in good and not banger. Next up is Bahrain, and I have it at the bottom end of average. There's generally good racing there, but I also find it a bit boring as well. I'm really happy that it's not the season opener anymore, or at least it isn't in 2025. I don't know if they're doing an alternating thing with Australia or what's going on there, but having it as the season opener would have knocked it up in my rankings, because I think in my excitement for Bahrain is usually because it's the first race of the season, but the track itself isn't that exciting for me. I also find that it's usually a two-stop race there, which is good, but it also means that usually teams are on the same kind of strategy, which makes it a little bit boring because and kind of predictable. You kind of have to wait for the third stint to really kind of see how the full race will come together. And again, it's a track in the Middle East, doesn't have a great atmosphere, not many fans attend it, so it's kind of knocked down in my rankings for that reason as well. Next up is Saudi Arabia, and it is going just behind Spa in average. I don't love that it is in Saudi Arabia. I think I would love this track more if it would just be transplanted into a different country. But I think I'm always really nervous for this race. There's a lot of blind corners at it, and drivers are going at super high speeds the whole time. I think there have been a couple banger races here, but a couple that have been just kind of mediocre. But yeah, I think the entire weekend here, I'm always just super nervous. It's been a miracle that there hasn't been a bigger incident here. I think there was the first year they raced there in F2. I don't know, it's a very unique track, but I think there's certain things about it that just really scare me. And so for that reason, I kind of have it in average. What race is that? Oh, Lord. Oh, it's Miami. Honestly, I don't know what track's what. I'm just gonna go with this being Miami. Miami is going in delete ahead of Qatar. Now that F1 has added Vegas, I don't really see the point of having Miami on the grid anymore. I think celebrities are going to want to pick one to go to, and they're going to pick Vegas out of those two options. And the racing here hasn't been fantastic, at least for the lead. I think there's been some good battles in kind of the midfield at this race, but I don't know, just something about it doesn't really excite me. I think that corner under the overpass is not great, and this track is also just bringing all of the cringe with none of the payoff of good racing. Okay, what the fuck is that track? Who are you? Oh, that's Imola. All right, we're going with the next one being Imola. And Imola I'm putting in delete as well. I think this is another track where there is a lot of history and a lot of tragedy, but the racing here hasn't been that good. I think 2021 was a pretty good race. I think it delivered a lot of chaos because it was wet, but the wet weather also means that there's no DRS, which means there's absolutely no overtaking happening. And I just think that modern F1 cars have kind of outgrown this circuit with Monza already being on the calendar. I think there are other countries in Europe that have good racetracks that I would rather this race be at. So that's kind of why I have Imola there. Next up is Monaco, and you are either a Monaco lover or a Monaco hater. There doesn't seem to be many people who aren't opinionated on this track. For me, it is a banger track. I don't care that the race is a procession. It could be the most boring race in the world, aka 2024 Monaco. But for me, the magic of Monaco is in the qualifying on the Saturday. And if you still complain about Monaco being on the grid in the Year of Our Lord 2025, go back and watch 2023 qualifying, and that alone will convince you why this needs to always be on the calendar. Monaco qualifying is my favorite day of the F1 calendar. I love it so much. It's always so exciting. The drivers' skills are on such display. It's always so tight. You don't know 100% what's going to happen. You can have a shock result. You can have an unbelievable pole like Max did in 2023 or Daniel did in 2018. It's just such a special track. And so for that reason, for me, it's a banger. Even though the race itself is rarely a banger, but qualifying is always a banger, and I love it so much. And so for me, it belongs in the banger category. Next up is Spain, and Spain is also going in delete behind Imola. I don't love Spain. I think similar to Bahrain, it's often a two-stop, so it can be kind of tough to follow how teams are actually doing until the final stint. They've also driven around this track so much due to testing and all of the junior categories. They've all raced it before. I think for that reason, there's just never any driver mistakes around here. So it's always just a strategy-driven race that rarely has a really good battle for the lead. Yeah, I'm never excited for this race either. And finally, the last race is Australia, and it is going ahead of Zandvoort, but behind Canada. Australia has kind of gotten knocked up because of the fact that it is now the first race of the year again, so that adds a little bit more excitement. I think Australia also can deliver very chaotic races. I don't know if I'd necessarily call them bangers or not though, because generally the racing around Australia isn't very good, but there are usually a lot of crashes and that can generate chaos. I think of Alex Albon as well as George in 2024, the Alpines and that race late red flag, and Carlos making that mistake and getting the penalty, knocking him back. So yeah, just a lot of crashes happen in this race, which can generate chaos, but the racing itself is rarely good. So that is my tier list of the F1 racetracks. Let me know in the comments down below what your tier list is, what your favorite tracks are, which tracks you think should be deleted. Now, I also wanted to go over some tracks that I would like to come back to replace the tracks that I have deleted. So I had 6 tracks in my deleted category, so I'm going to add 6 more back. The first track that I would add back is Hockenheim, because I fucking love Hockenheim 2019, and anything that will generate a race like that again would make me so happy, and the first step in that is to go back to this racetrack. There have been some pretty iconic moments around here. I think of Seb crashing in 2018, basically destroying his title fight that year. And then obviously, yeah, everything that happened in 2019. Yeah, it's just so chaotic in the wet, and I just want it back. I want it back so bad. The second track I would add back is Malaysia. I've only seen one race here, which was Daniel Ricciardo's win in 2016. But it seems like a really neat track. I really like that really long straight and heavy braking zone down the middle of it. And all I know is it has this like really pointy bit. But yeah, I would love if they would return to this track. I don't even know if it's still operational, but yeah, I think that part of the world deserves more racetracks, and this is definitely one that I kind of thought of. Next up for me is Kailami in South Africa. I think that if F1 wants to call itself a world championship, it needs to race in every populated continent, which includes Africa. So the fact that there isn't a race here currently is very disappointing. So I think Kailami is the one that people often talk of, but apparently there's also one that might be made in Rwanda. A lot of human rights issues happening there, so not sure how happy I am with that. But I think if any place in Africa can get a race going, I would love that. I think it's a continent that deserves to have some of these sporting events, and yeah, I'd love to see what the fan atmosphere would be like at a race there. Another race I would like to see back in F1 is Turkey. I think there have been 2 races that I've seen here, 2020 and 2021. 2020 was a near Lance Stroll win, which was wild, and then it ended up being, I think, the race that Lewis ended up clinching his 7th world title at. And then 2021 was also very interesting. I think that was one where a lot of people just stayed on inters the whole race, and there were a couple good battles between Checo and Lewis at that race. But yeah, it was a very interesting track, and I think the new tarmac had thrown some wrenches in the plan, so that was quite interesting. And I think Turkey 2020 is like the race that made everyone think that Lance Stroll was good in the wet. And then he hasn't shown any of that promise since. Next up is Mugello. Now, I know that I said that I wanted Imola to be deleted for another track in Europe, but I think Mugello is interesting. I think they've only been there once in the last few seasons, and that was in the COVID-shortened 2020 season. Apparently it was a chaotic race. That's actually one I haven't watched yet, so I can't say for certain, but I would love that if they did bring Mugello back, that they would alternate it with Imola. I think that would be a really neat way to introduce more tracks on the calendar. I know that's something that they're going to be moving towards with Spa, so I think if Mugello could be added into the rotation, that would be really neat. The last place I would like to add a race to would be Argentina. Now, I don't know if there's actually a grade 1 circuit in Argentina for them to do this, but it sounds like with the support around Franco Colapinto that they're wanting to bring a race back to Argentina. I think it would be a really neat place to see a race. I like the fact that there would then be a second South American race. Yeah, I think that part of the world deserves a little bit more attention in F1, and especially sponsorship money coming from that part of the world. I think it would be a good money-making opportunity for F1 as well. So a lot of positives going in that direction. But I would also have to see what the track would look like first before I would fully rubber stamp it. So that is my F1 track ranking, as well as my wish list for new tracks to be added. Let me know in the comments down below what racetracks you would like added. Are there any in the world, maybe even in the US, that you would like to see instead of some of the existing tracks? And did I miss any obvious ones in my list? I'm sure I did. I am not aware of all of the racetracks in the world. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you did, and follow along as we're getting geared up for the start of the 2025 season starting next week.